So, welcome back to we've made it to 10 episodes of the My Generation podcast, and today we're going to be interviewing Eleanor Sutcliffe, a University of Kent student, about acting and performing. We actually made it to 10 episodes, so let me know what you thought and think about these episodes. Again, we're back in the same room, which has the pipes going on in the background, so it's going to sound like we're underwater for a 4th week running, which is pretty good. But, Eleanor, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No problem. So, we're going to be talking about acting and performing with Eleanor, going through what she has done at University of Kent. Now, I used to do acting and spend time behind the scenes, writing and producing and directing. So to compare with episode 4 when we spoke to Cleo about the writing side, we wanted to take a step onto the stage and talk about what it's like when you're actually all the lights are on you. So we're talking to Eleanor Sutcliffe, University of Kent student who recently appeared in a student production entitled Ace Face. So Eleanor, what got you into acting, and if you could talk about Ace Face a little bit as well?
Oh, I think I've been into acting since I was very young. I think part of it my interest in acting came about through watching a film called Ballet Shoes when I was 10 or 11 years old. And from there, I knew that I wanted to give it a go. So when I was 11, I joined my local Stagecoach Theatre Academy, and I was there for 6 years. I was there for 6 years, and I got to do many amazing things, and I've done other stuff since. So I was very recently in a show called The Ace Face.
Oh, is it The
Ace Face, yes, which was about the mods versus the rockers in 1960s Margate, and it was commissioned by the Gulbenkian for its 50th anniversary celebration, and it was produced by T24, which is the Drama Society at Kent, and I was very lucky to be cast to join the show's ensemble. So I played a policeman, even though I'm not sure why they cast me as a policeman when there were other girls in the cast who were like twice my height. Yeah. And I played very aggressive rockers and mods.
Yeah, and it was quite a full-on show because you had a lot of roles, didn't you? You weren't just one character. You had to. There was a lot of costume changes.
Yeah. I have had more ridiculous costume changes before, and I was at one point in a show when I was 14 called The Caucasian Chalk Circle, where I played 7 different characters. So
oh, wow.
This was kind of nothing compared to what I did then.
7 characters.
I know.
And was that quite a long show as well? So that's quite,
it was like a cut down version of Caucasian Chalk Circle by Brecht, but it was still very fun. I still had a lot of costume changes, but it was great fun.
So you've been involved in this for quite a while. I remember I used to go to Stagecoach too. They're very interactive. You get to do a lot of shows at quite a young age as well. So you said about 10 or 11 you've been doing this since.
Yes. So my first production at Stagecoach was when I first joined, and it was a show called The Magical Mythical Megastar, which was based on the Greek myth of Perseus and Medusa, and I did other shows with them. So when I was in their further stages, their older crew, I was in a few showcases, and then I was in Fame, where I was ensemble. I was a dancer and understudied Mrs. Myers, the drama teacher, and then I played Miss Lynch in Greece as my final show with them.
Wow! So you kept quite busy on the stage. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what was it like, actually, the first time you were involved in a project and the first time you stepped out on stage? What was the feeling?
It was nerve-wracking because this was something outside of a school environment.
Yeah.
And I think for me, and this has always been when I've been acting, I haven't been nervous on stage. It's just the anticipation of waiting to go on stage. For example, when I was in Coraline, which was in March last year, so this was the first show I did acting wise with T24. I didn't come on until like 25 minutes into the show, and I remember sitting in the dressing room just feeling really, really nervous.
Yeah.
But kind of once I was on stage, I wasn't me anymore. I was the character I was playing, which is something I've always had when I've gone on stage. I've gone, okay, I'm not Eleanor anymore. This is who I'm playing. This is what she's feeling, and this is what she's doing. And
what I liked about the Ace Face
Yes.
is that everyone was pretty much on stage for most of the time.
We were, yes.
So it was quite a full-on piece because it was quite a long one,
Yes.
but it meant that you were always changing characters. So you said that you find you sort of cut out of just your regular mode of being Eleanor and going into a role.
Yeah.
How is that like being in an ensemble then, where you have to constantly keep changing who you are on stage?
I think for me, kind of preparing kind of beforehand helps. So for my different characters, I came up with names for them. I thought about what they'd been doing in the day and why they were there at the scenes they were. So, for example, my rocker character, I said that my name's Tara, and this was a girl who was a tomboy. She liked hanging out with the boys, being on the motorbike, and being with her kind of it would have been my on-stage boyfriend, Darius. And then for my policeman, for example, I decided that my name was Lorna, and I'd been a police officer for 5 years, but absolutely hated the job. Came up with a list of reasons why.
But you had a good cop, bad cop thing, didn't you? Where they had the cop that was really nice to everyone, and then you who was just like the aggressive one. I think that's good though. I know when I'm a writer, I always name every character, even if they're side characters.
Yeah.
But I know people at my theatre group who don't even name their main characters, and that baffles me. And I couldn't do that. But
it just gives you like a lot of purpose, and it kind of helps to keep you kind of within that sort of frame where it keeps you in, it keeps you focused. And
so is this something you've done for everything you do, even non-ensemble work, where you build a backstory away from the script?
Yeah, that's something I always kind of like to do. So for my Shakespeare's theatre performance, which was one of the modules at Kent, we had to come up with an original piece using lines from Shakespeare. So me and my friend Andy, who was playing my onstage husband, we kind of came up with like a backstory of how our characters like met, how our families kind of knew each other. And
that's cool.
I think we all kind of found it helpful, really, because it really helps us to kind of build our characters. And that's something I've also been exploring through putting together the Merry Wives of Windsor for the Canterbury Shakespeare Festival.
And is that your next upcoming thing? Whereabouts is that? It's
going to be on a house on Tyler Hill on the 1st to the 3rd of August.
Oh, nice. So is it, it's at the Tyler House,
and
is that open to the public?
Well, on those dates it is being open to the public. It's owned by a lady called Mary, who's very nice. She's kind of one of the sort of patrons of the university, and she's got like this huge garden which she likes to offer to the Canterbury Shakespeare Festival to perform in. So they did Much Ado About Nothing there, and it went down really well. And
so do you actually get to do prep on location, or do you?
I will be, yes. So this coming weekend, so probably not the upcoming weekend of this podcast coming out, but on the 29th and the 30th of June, I think that's going to be the first time I'm going to take my cast over, and we're going to rehearse in that space, because normally we've just been using University of Kent campus to rehearse in.
It's a bit different compared to actually on location. So you talked about rehearsals. Now, I'm a film student, and I know that theatre, the process of rehearsals and the relationship with the director is very different. I've read that when you're a film director, you have a lot more control. It's a lot more your vision. But I know in theatre, it's a lot more the director directs, but then the actors take that and go. Yeah. So what would you say your relationships like with directors you worked with in terms of acting groups and what it's like working with them?
Oh, so I've always been quite lucky to have really good relationships with my directors, because they have allowed us to offer some ideas, but I think it's always kind of depended on what sort of shows I was working on. So when I was in a youth group called Sawston Youth Drama, which was attached to the secondary school I went to, it was kind of much more kind of the director's vision, and he kind of told us what to do and we just responded. Whereas kind of moving away from that and moving into kind of more kind of sort of university-based shows, we have been able to kind of have a lot of creative kind of input into it. And I've been lucky to have the directors I've worked with for those sorts of shows have always been really open, and so I have come to my directors before with ideas about how a scene could go or how my character could respond, and they've just gone, okay, just show me, and then a lot of the time they've gone with it, which has been wonderful.
That's nice. So you actually have contributed to the script or just ideas?
I think contributed ideas, but I have contributed things to scripts before, and
because I know I did a piece with the Marlowe they did a play about Brexit, which was called
Brexit.
To Be Decided, and they wanted someone to. I wrote about it because they wanted someone who didn't really know a whole lot about it, and so I thought, okay, I haven't really ever written about the subject, so go for it. And I know the actors for that had a ton of workshopping before I was even on board with the project, where they got to actually contribute things to the final script.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a bit of a different way of working. That was a very experimental piece where the director gave them so much freedom. And as my sole experience with theatre, I thought it would be interesting to see what you think about the director's vision versus the actor's contributions.
Yeah, I think the actors' contributions is just so valuable because it's also their project as well. It's not just about the director. Like, you've got a whole team on board, and I think some directors fall into the trap of just making it absolutely about them, and so the kind of like, because they set such hard limits for their actors, it actually makes them much harder to respond, and they don't get like kind of as many positive things out of the experience as they could do.
Yeah.
So in my rehearsals for Merry Wives, I've had like a lot of my cast coming up with ideas and saying, oh, could we actually do this? Or I think this is what a scene means, this is what's happening, this is what's going on under the text. And I've just always been, well, I hope I have, I've been open from day one about my cast kind of contributing, and I really want them to contribute. And if they've offered an idea, I've just gone, okay. And then I've kind of talked with them about it a bit more, and then we've played it, and it's been really nice.
And so you've obviously dived headfirst into theatre. You've had it for years now. And what made you choose theatre as opposed to film or radio dramas? What makes it special?
I think because it's a live experience. So in film and radio, you don't like... It's not kind of like the connection's not really there in a way that it is for theatre. And kind of live theatre can just be so exciting and visceral and really kind of attack at your senses, whereas in film and radio it's kind of not quite the same. So I can think of one example that I think is a great reason why live theatre is so great is because there's a show called Hadestown on Broadway, which is based on the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And the actor playing Hermes gave a woman in the front row his handkerchief because she'd started crying, like really badly at the very sad ending. Oh, no spoilers if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it. But it's just like, that's just, I think is a great example of the magic of live theatre. But I think also I've just had more kind of opportunities offered to me in theatre. I haven't had as much chance to go, or I haven't been offered the chance to kind of go and try for like more film and radio drama, even though I would really love to do it.
Yeah, so theatre's quite an accessible thing for you. And yeah, I like what you said about live, because I go to the pantomime at the Marlow every year.
Oh, I went to see Peter Pan there. I loved it.
I've been every year for about 10 years now. And you see like live mistakes as well, which end up adding to the comedy. You see actors fall over. I know that there was one scene where they had like a boat that was going to come on stage and they were going to row it off, and it got stuck halfway across the stage, and so they had to get all the people on stage to push it off.
Oh, that's kind of like what happened on the night that I went to see Peter Pan. Actually, Lloyd Hollett, I think, he kind of accidentally hit himself in the eye. Was trying to push the boat out, and it was so funny.
I think that might have been the same night, I'll be honest. Yeah, and you only really get that with theatre.
Yeah.
Whereas, or live podcasts. This is, my life's in radio, but I always find it interesting why people pick and choose their mediums, because I sort of swap between all three of them, but you're very theatre. And so, in terms of going forward, you've got the next show coming up. What's your aspirations going forward?
I think my aspirations going forward are I'd really love to direct more shows, because it's just something I've always wanted to do, and I think it really kind of sparked off through my drama A-level, where we had to look at the plays Our Country's Good and The Seagull by Chekhov, and a lot of the written work was like, how would we direct certain scenes, and so we had to cover like tech and acting and just everything down to the smallest detail. And that was the thing what really started it. So I think I really wanted to kind of act in more shows, do some more directing, and because I'd love to be an actor and director. And
so have you actually directed anything as of yet?
The only thing is the Merry Wives of Windsor, which I'm starting, so this is the first time I've really kind of stepped into the directing shoes, and I've tried for opportunities before, but I didn't get them. But I've now found Canterbury Shakespeare Festival, and they've given me this chance.
Wow,
and
that's good
so
responsibility.
far, I'm absolutely loving it. I really am.
So I saw you in the Ace of Ace. I've seen a lot of the examples you mentioned have been scripts that are being adapted from well-known writers. Have you worked on work from like quite small independent writers? Where did the script for the Ace of Ace come from?
So it came from the vision of our two directors, Matt and Ben. So the Ace of Ace was based in the 60s, and the Gob, I think, opened in 1969.
Yeah.
One of the directors, Ben, is a very, very big fan of 1960s music, or granddad sort of music, as he calls it. And it was really his love of 1960s music that really inspired the script and the story. And he and Matt have like a really good friendship. And so I think Matt's always wanted to step into the directing shoes. And so it was their kind of joint passion and their vision that they kind of wrote the script together, kind of based on a lot of the songs that you would have heard when you came to see me.
Yes, yeah. And it's like, I know from a more film example, there's a lot of directors who they work well together but can't seem to get it to click, like Ethan and Joel Coen, the Coen brothers. They work, whenever they work together, seems to always work out. But I don't think I've seen many of their movies perform well if it's just one of them. Sometimes there's something about directors who work together. Because I know when I'm a writer, I always go to my theatre group to get the ideas, see if they work, and if they do, take it back.
Oh yeah, that's what I do with some scripts I've written as well.
Yeah, so do you take them to a class or other actors?
So before, I've taken them to, there's a T24 group called WIP, which stands for Work in Progress, where we've read scripts out, and then people can offer ideas and suggestions, or if things need to be clear or need to be changed, I can kind of do that, and I can take that on board.
Yeah, so is that just within University of Kent? Or
kind of University of Kent at the moment, because I haven't had a chance to kind of bring other work in just yet.
So is it a lot of actors? They also write scripts as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of them do kind of come in and bring in kind of ideas for plays as well. And it's just like anyone can come along and just read some parts and read some lines from original work written by our members, and I think everyone really enjoys it, which is great.
Well, yeah, because you then not only are writing your own things, but then you are acting someone else's script, so everyone gets something, really, don't they?
Yes, so T24 also do what's called Thrift Shows, so those are shows written by members of the society.
Yeah.
So I stagehand a show called There Are No Churches in the Wild, which was based around a very high intense poker game, and the 7 characters were based on the 7 deadly sins. And I stage managed a show called Sardines, which was written by my friend Alec, and it was based on the episode Sardines from Inside Number 9, and it was great. I was just so impressed. I think that was the best T24 thrift show in my opinion.
Yeah. And are they publicly available? Can you see these thrift shows, just anyone, or?
I think you can certainly come along if you're interested in if it's something that interests you. Keep an eye on what T24 does, because they have really produced some very kind of outstanding quality original shows that I think really would do well on bigger stages. And
and working. Can you imagine them on like even like the Marlowe main stage or something?
Yes.
It's the dream. Or obviously you've been involved in a lot of theatre productions. Do you go in terms of inspiration? I know that some people go out and watch lots of plays. I watch a lot of movies to try and give me inspiration for my ideas. Or some people like to read plays, just go to the shop, buy and read. What's your way of consuming theatre content?
Oh, so I love going to see theatre. Because I just love the live experience, and whenever I go, I try and look at the actors' work, and I try and look at the production and creative side, and see if there's anything in it that I might like to take and use and stuff in my own work. But then I also love reading shows as well. So I've read Mary Stuart because I saw it in Cambridge when it came to the city. Yeah. And actually a friend of mine was in it, so it was really interesting to go back and read the original.
Because I know my sister, she's an English student, but she can't get her head around the idea of reading a play. She could only see it live, whereas if I'm ever reading theatre, I've read Death of a Salesman.
I think with reading theatre, what really helps is having seen like a live production of it before, so you kind of know what you're about, you can imagine things, and
Yeah, well, in fact, an interesting example. Do you know much about Goran Stefanovsky? Because he quite a well-known playwright. He was a lecturer here. Recently, sadly, passed away, but he's Macedonian playwright, very well known, and he had some of his plays translated, and they're available in the university bookshop here, which anyone can go and buy. So if you're near Christchurch, you can go and have a look. They've got some of his old work translated. Beautiful stuff, and I've started reading through it, and in between some of the pages they have pictures of shows that were done of his plays back in the 80s.
That's interesting.
Incredible. But I thought I'd mention that because he was a great lecturer at this university, and he's very well known Macedonian playwright, and sadly passed away recently, but his work is still there. You can buy 5 of his plays at the university bookshop. I'm currently reading through The Black Hole, and I'm sort of looking at how I would picture it on stage, what I would do. So do you get that feeling when you write or when you read something, how you would stage it?
Yeah, I think I really do. And then a lot of it's kind of inspired by kind of maybe shows that I've seen, because like I'm quite lucky to have kind of like a very kind of vivid memories, so I can kind of put myself back into watching a show, and like I'm remembering particular moments and kind of how I reacted to them. And
have you seen any shows like multiple times but by different directors and how they compare? So if you've seen it once done by someone completely different, you thought, I'll rewatch it and see what this person's done. Have you had that experience?
I have. I think that's really been kind of through through Shakespeare, because I'm a very big lover of Shakespeare, and the last live production of Shakespeare I went to see was Richard III, done by a company called Headlong Theatre, and I think it was truly outstanding and really kind of like the best Shakespearean production I've ever watched. So the idea was, it was kind of very, very limited colour in the show, so it was very kind of monochrome and dark, and so when you saw blood, it really, really stood out, and it kind of would really kind of attack the audience's senses, and the actors kind of made mess on stage, and they entered and exited through kind of mirrors. It really worked so nicely.
Well, that's interesting about theatre, isn't it? Because you can adapt a script that's hundreds of years old, and there's always going to be someone new to do something different with it.
Yeah, because and in that show, because they cut out lots of the characters, and so it became, so originally this is a show with like over 20 different characters, and they very much reduced it to, I think, a cast of 9, I believe.
Yeah, I've
I've
seen
9 characters.
I've read Richard III, and there's a lot more than 9 in the original version.
I think because they cut a lot of it out, and they had actors doubling, and so there was a woman who was playing roles that would have been like originally male, but she made them kind of like female, and it just worked so beautifully.
And so what is your favourite Shakespeare play? The toughest question.
I would definitely have to be As You Like It. I love that play.
Yeah. I haven't actually read or seen that play. Could you paint a picture maybe for the listeners of just what it's about? Sell it to me.
As You Like It is but it's a comedy by Shakespeare. It centres around a woman called Rosalind, who is at the court of her uncle, Duke Frederick. So he basically deposed her uncle, the rightful Duke. She's best friends with her cousin Cecilia, and she falls in love with Orlando, the younger son of Orlando de Bourgh, who didn't get on with the Duke. And so when Duke Frederick finds out that he's his son, having won his wrestling tournament, he banishes Orlando and then banishes Rosalind. And so Rosalind, Cecilia, and their court jester Touchstone go to the Forest of Arden to kind of go and be with Orlando as well.
And we'll have to check it out.
And Rosalind goes dressed as a boy called Ganymede. So a very great example of cross-dressing in Shakespeare. And it's just, she's very much often compared to Prospero from The Tempest, and people say she's kind of like a female Prospero, for the way she kind of conjures the audience. She changes her mind. She's very energetic. She kind of works magic on people. And
what, so she's in the audience working like spells or things, or just talking directly to the audience?
She kind of talks directly to the audience, and kind of how she kind of performs her lines and how she interacts with the other characters as well. And
so, well, one thing I did want to talk about, and this is a question I think is going to be kind of difficult because I don't have any specific examples. Adapting.
Yeah.
So films turning into stage play, play turning into films, or books or radio dramas.
Mm-hmm.
have you got any examples of this recently that have gone good, gone bad? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, the original's always going to be better, no matter where the original comes from. But do you have examples of adapting?
I do. So one example is Coraline, who I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So it was the creative vision of Freddie Main, who's a former Kent student, who's actually directing a show for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this summer.
Wow.
So what he did was he took aspects from the film and the book. So you had like dialogue from that was used in the book and the film. But then what he did was he added scenes of his own creation, which he was only kind of really able to do because he got permission. He got like direct permission from Neil Gaiman, the original writer, to do it.
Oh wow!
And so, for example, there was a lot of focus on like the use of food to kind of suggest the unhealthiness of the other world and the addictive side of it. And I was playing a character called Oral-B, so I was one of 3 minions named after toothpastes. And the idea of us we were like transforming into whatever the other mother needed to kind of lure Coraline into the other world.
Yeah.
And then it turned out that we were actually other previous children that she'd trapped.
Oh wow!
And so instead of the original happy ending of the book and the film, we actually had a bittersweet kind of sad ending instead.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that was a really great example, I think, of adapting. I think back in my home city, the Junction is a centre where a lot of original work comes in. And so they've done like a lot of like adaptations of like children's books for their Christmas shows. Like one of my favourite ones was when they did Around the World in 80 days.
Yes.
And so they had like live musics, acting musicians, they had like puppetry, and they made a mess on stage. And it just worked like so beautifully. And I think only kind of one that's really kind of springing to mind now there's a couple that sprung to mind now that I think really didn't work.
Yeah. I
saw a show of The Great Gatsby. And don't get me wrong, the creative side and design was absolutely brilliant, but everything else just really wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, there was only really one really good actor in it, despite being a professional production. And it just wasn't very well, like, this, because they used live music, which, was a really great idea and I thought could work, but it's just they didn't really use it in a very good way, so it just like really got in the way.
I went to see a play called I won't say where, but it was called Kanye the First, and it was about someone who woke up in the body of basically they saw themselves as themselves, but the whole world saw them as Kanye West. And the concept I think is quite good, but they had some major script changes to cut the time down and basically cut most of the first act, which I found out afterwards, because you sort of came into it after they had found out that they were Kanye West.
Yeah.
And everyone was fine with it. Everyone was just like, yeah, I know Kanye West now. And they were like, yeah, apparently I'm Kanye West. It'd be like if you woke up tomorrow morning and someone told you that and you were just fine straight away. But sometimes, because too many hands got involved in that. And we had a great discussion afterwards, and that's the problem we found.
Yeah.
I want to talk about another play in terms of minimalism. Because I think this is something on stage. And again, sort of with this podcast, this is just 2 people sat in a room talking. Quite minimalistic.
Yes.
A really good example that I saw was a play called Carry On Jaywick.
Never heard of that, unfortunately.
It was a tiny production, but basically my dad grew up in the village next to Jaywick, which was Clacton on Sea, and Jaywick was basically quite a deprived area, and so it was based on true stories about people in Jaywick, and a lot of the actors played different roles. So it was one where people chopping and changing, but the set was really simple because it was a seaside town. You had like a seaside like deck chair, you had a like plank of wood that someone would stand on to be here, and so literally tiny little props meant complete different location changes, and because of the way they did it, it really worked. I'd say I don't even know if this play's coming out ever again. It was a tiny show, but recommend it. Would you say you had any examples of minimalism and really creative uses of next to nothing working?
Yes. Have you seen The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime?
No.
Oh my gosh, you have to see that if it ever comes back to London. So what was so interesting about that was it was set, so when I saw it, it was at the Guildgard Theatre in London, and so kind of the whole set was kind of like this it wasn't really like a computer lab, but you had like all these squares all around it. So it was like this big kind of 3D grid. And then actors brought on like those white boxes kind of around the perimeter.
Okay.
And they kind of became different things. So they became seats for a train. One of them lifted up to like be a toilet.
Okay.
And they had actors kind of even like disappearing from doors in the set as well. Yeah. And there was a lot of like new, and then they had like little lights in the squares as well. So it was all kind of used to, because the curious incident of the dog and nighttime is told from the perspective of Christopher, who's a young man with autism. And so this was kind of, I thought this, having such a minimalist set was really, really effective, because it kind of really allowed us to kind of come into his mind and kind of see things from his point of view. And I think that it was also really helped by kind of what a fantastic job the ensemble did in this show. So it was all the choreography was done by Frantic Assembly, the big physical theatre. I have done a couple of shows myself where we had like very minimalist to no set at all. One of them was an original show called Talk Me Down, which was with a company I was with at the Junction back in Cambridge. And it was based on like stars who died young, who died back in 2016, because we lost a lot of very wonderful people, like, you know, Gene Wilder, David Bowie, Alan Rickman and Carrie Fisher. So the only thing we kind of had was like this four-line grid, but it was like some sort of like sort of thing you would expect from like a racetrack or something like that. Yeah. So that was the only set we had. And then the year beforehand with the same company, I was in a show called Blackout, and it was based on the true story of a young offender from Glasgow. Yeah. So we kind of switched the space round. So where the stage normally is, that was where we put the audience. And so we were performing in the areas where the audience like normally sat. So we took away the chairs and we kind of used the higher levels as well. And it just like and because we kind of dressed as if we were young offenders, we were dressed in the uniforms that kind of young offenders wear in many institutions. I thought was absolutely brilliant for kind of how it allowed us to focus on the story and kind of really enhance the powerful effect.
Nice. Well, yeah, and it's about you can put that play on quite easily as well. You don't need a small crew. Yeah. I know with a lot of my writing, I write it so it's 4 characters and no props. I've just come off the back of writing a short comedy, because having written about Brexit, I want it where it's like a big nation-changing issue. I thought, I just want to write about something like 3 guys sat in a room. I need 3 chairs and 4 people, and then you can put on the whole show. It's something very different to film, where you need camera crews and set up, and it's very static with how it's all getting made. And I've read through film scripts, and there's not a whole ease of taking a film script and transferring it away to like a completely new group of people, in the way that you said someone's taken Richard III and made it monochrome and dark and cut half the characters. I feel like that's a little harder with film. But yeah, we're going to go back to talk a little bit more very shortly. So that was what Eleanor and I have to say so far about acting and performance. But do you have a story to tell on this subject? If so, feel free to comment on YouTube or contact the My Generation podcast on Facebook. We'll be featuring comments over the next few episodes. We're at episode 10 now, so in episode 13 or 14 we'll be getting to you. Now, we're going to be going to local impact in a moment. We've touched on a lot of places in Kent, mainly through University of Kent. So in a moment I want to talk about other places in Kent you can get involved in theatre. But do you have... or have you seen, I just wanted to talk about the film Dogville. Have you seen or heard of Dogville?
I haven't, no.
It's a strange one. I'm just going to mention it before we move on, because it's a movie that's got no set. So it's all set outdoors in a small town or a small street, but it's basically made in a black box with like chalk lines on the floor. It feels like I'm watching a stage production, but on screen. So yeah, I'd highly recommend checking out. I mean, we talked about movies last week, but I neglected to mention Dogville, because it's strange. The whole, basically, if you're watching people on one side of the town and they're talking in the village hall, you can see all the way across the entire set at 2 people having a chat in a house 4 or 5 meters or yards down the road. And it's just such a weird film. But yeah, as theatre, it sort of blends the two, and that's what I thought I'd mention it. But now on to local impact. So what can we do if you're involved or want to get involved in theatre within Kent? You've talked about T24. Do you know any other examples of ways, if you're interested in theatre, writing, acting, performing, you can get involved locally?
There's the Canterbury Shakespeare Festival, so it's always worth keeping an eye on the social media because they post very regularly about what opportunities there are. So some of the shows like Lear, which is an experimental version of King Lear, is looking for someone to play Old Tom.
Yeah.
And Timon of Athens is looking for people to take on 6 roles as well. So that's a great way to get involved, and it's very much community theatre. There's the Canterbury Players as well, who put on a lot of shows as well.
Okay.
So I know people who've done like shows with them. There's the Canterbury Operatic Society, who I think kind of do musical theatre. There is a youth group at the Marlow as well.
That's who I wrote my play for. So I know
Marlow
them
Youth
well.
Group. I know people kind of in that.
Yeah.
And also there's, I think the Gulbenkian have a youth group as well. There's RT31, which is the young group, and then Art 31, which is kind of the older group as well, where you can get involved in kind of different things, and they do sort of different stuff as well.
Well, we're going to try and compile a list of all those and put them in the description. So if you want to get involved and you live in Kent, well, Eleanor's got an entire list of all the things. There's no excuse now not to get involved if you want to act and perform. There's so many different options. I didn't realise how much was in Kent.
I know. I mean, I've only kind of spoken what's kind of in Canterbury, but there's stuff all over Kent. So there's a Facebook group called Kent Performing Arts where people from different parts of Kent and with different companies will kind of post things up, like, like casting calls or, calls for like tickets or...
Oh, nice. Yeah, we'll link them all below, so get involved. And if you're not from Kent and you're listening, A, thank you for listening, and B, I'm sure that there's going to be the equivalent for wherever you live. You just got to search around local theatres, because I'm surprised. Before I got into theatre writing, I thought theatre was a dying medium, but it's not.
I think a lot of people think that, but it's really not, no.
Yeah, last week we would have talked to Emma about film photography, and that was another thing that until I got involved in it, I thought it was dying. And so theatre, most certainly still thriving.
Yeah, I very much think so, because there's new work coming out all the time, and I think kind of like it's not really dying out in the way that there is still kind of like a yearning for kind of things of the past. So, like the Globe, for example, they're doing like Shakespeare plays, and they still do it in a lot of period dress, and people absolutely love it. So I think there's still very much like a need for to kind of revive old things from the past, and I think as long as there are enthusiastic directors and actors, then I'm sure there'll always be a need and drive for it. So at this stage, I'm not worried about theatre dying out.
Yeah, I'm not worried either, which is great news, especially if you're listening to this and you watch a lot of movies or TV or read a lot of books and you were thinking, well, I can't watch theatre, it's not very accessible. But it's out there. You can watch youth projects all the time, and so many little ones just in Canterbury. I also wanted to touch on, if you're a writer, there's something called Raw, which is something in collaboration with the Marlow. By the time this is out, the deadline will have passed, but they do it yearly. So you submit a proposal. In fact, we talked about this with Cleo, but it's changed for this year. So updating what we said with Cleo about Raw, where you submit a proposal for an idea, why you think you should write it, maybe outline some of the requirements. You send it off, and if it gets accepted, they'll workshop it with you. I think you get a small budget as well, and you can actually put on a play, small scale. There's no guarantees of it going on, but they'll at least do like rehearse readings, get actors in and things with a very small budget. But that's really cool. And so if you're a writer, definitely check that out. Again, we're going to fill the description with hundreds of links. Me and Eleanor have got loads of stuff for theatre. You thought it was a dying medium. We had Cleo on before. Eleanor today. It's definitely not dying. Now, before we go to the end of the show and wrap up the final thoughts, we're just going to tease a few more topics we got coming. So, we have... Last week, we would have had, actually, solo travelling with Mike. We finally got around to doing that episode. We've got trains with Stephen again. I've been mentioning this over the past 3 or 4 weeks. We're finally getting Stephen on to talk about trains and the work he does. And we're also going to be getting a returning guest. Dan Inwood, our first podcast guest, is coming back. Are you excited to hear from him again? I know I sure am. We're going to be having him talking about life-changing moments. That's Dan Inwood. At the end of August, we've got episodes through the whole of summer, We're recording this at the end of June, and it's actually bright outside now. I know when I came down here this morning, it wasn't bright at all.
No.
And so hopefully, even if the weather started to peter off by the time these episodes are coming out, we're keeping you warm and welcomed through all of summer and then into September with new podcast episodes. Now, we'll be going back to Eleanor in just a moment to wrap up this week's show about acting and performing, but there are future topics that we are still looking for people to talk about. So if you have a story about mindfulness and meditation, get in touch. Maybe you meditate or now do yoga. We want to hear your story. We also need a guest to talk about a new experience they've had. Have you tried a new activity? How was it? Did it meet your expectations? Maybe Eleanor today has convinced you to start acting. If so, get in touch. We want to know how it went, and we might be able to get you on the show. If you don't want to come on and talk live, leave a comment. All those comments are coming up in the next few episodes of the show. And if you'd like to be featured, let us know. YouTube description. We've got Facebook. My email's down there. It's all going to be down there. It's going to be one of the longest descriptions I think I've written. Although I did an episode recently where I talked about films that people commented on. And that I'll link that episode down as well. But going back to Eleanor and talking about acting and performing, what would you say is the one thing you've taken away from today's show, Eleanor?
One thing I've kind of taken from today's show, I think maybe the desire to do more kind of film and radio work, because I know people who do it, and that's how kind of working on short films, kind of how we met. And
yeah, well, actually, we haven't even mentioned that. Well, talk about how we even met.
So me and Max met when we both kind of starred in a short film for our friend Edie Brennan. So Max was the lead character, and I was playing one of his housemates, one of his very brutal housemates.
You weren't very nice to me in that, were you?
No, I wasn't.
That is the first time I've acted in about 5 years, I'll be honest. And that was part of the inspiration for this episode, was recording that.
Because before then, I'd done like a shorts. I'd shot a little bit for a short where I was playing a very small role in another student film. But that was the first time I'd worked on camera for ages, and it's actually something I've kind of really missed doing.
Yeah. Well, it felt so strange being in front of the camera. I'm used to directing. I'd just come off the back of directing a short film for my uni project. But it felt so nice to be directed, because I was like, none of this, I don't have to control the camera, the producing work. It's all going to be ready for when I arrive.
Yeah.
It's such a strange experience being in front of it. But yeah, well, if it's inspired you to try a different medium as well, it's always good. Have you done any radio work before?
I've never done radio work before, but the only kind of voice work I've ever done is like do Lambda exams and speaking prose and verse, and I've done very, very well. And but it's just something I'd love to be able to do again, because I do love reading and doing.
Every genre has its own, or medium has its own little bits. I mean, I only met Edie because I helped on this woman called Amelia. She did a short radio piece for Christchurch, and Edie was there as well. I was a very, very minor character in that, so it's hardly any acting at all. But that's how I met her. And I think acting is a great networking way. I've literally done 2 acting pieces, and I've met a lot of people from it.
Yeah, I think same here. I've met so many different people, and it's just such a great networking. And now I've got all sorts of connections that I can amaze my friends with.
Yeah. So is there any actual examples of like really big names that I might know that you've met?
I'm very proud that I think the 2 that really kind of stand out for me are Matthew Morrison and Kelsey Grammer. So Matthew Morrison is best known for playing Mr. Schuster in Glee. Yeah. And Kelsey Grammer, who you might know as Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So they were both starring in a production of Finding Neverland the Musical on Broadway, and I went to see it with my mum when I was 16 to celebrate the end of my GCSEs. And because we got chatting to the stage door manager before the show, he actually invited us to join a backstage tour afterwards.
Wow, that's
so
awesome.
we got to go backstage after the show, meet some of the stars, and have a tour of a Broadway theatre.
Wow, an exclusive.
Yes.
And in fact, I was talking to Connor in the 6th episode of the podcast. Again, I'll link it all below. We talked about how, for him, sport boosted his social life. So for him, he used the climbing society at the uni as not only a way to physically improve, but also he met a lot of his friends through it. Yeah. I talked about badminton and how a lot of my core group now I met as a result of badminton. would you say acting's been one of those things that's like an icebreaker in a way?
I think it has. Certainly when I first joined, came to Kent, I was really, really shy, and I didn't know anyone, and I knew that I definitely wanted to join acting and musical theatre because those were my passions and I had experience in them. So I think that was kind of really how I've met some of my very good friends, and I joined the Latin and Ballroom Club kind of more full time this year, and I made lots of really wonderful friends and really wonderful and supportive friends there as well.
Because you're all pushing towards the same objective, are you?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a little bit repeating what I said with Connor, because it's something that's makes it a lot less isolated, especially in a new place as well, because you came from Cambridge, didn't you? So,
yes.
And I know he came from Margate, which is a bit closer, but once you throw yourself into a new environment, it's another hobby that pushes you through.
Yeah.
But would you say acting for you and theatre in general is a hobby, or is this something that's going to be your life, your career?
I think this is going to much be my career, because even though it's really, really hard and very brutal, I can't really imagine myself doing any other sort of job, really.
Yeah, so this is carrying you through. This is your path in life. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talk about it. That is Eleanor talking about acting and performance. Well, Eleanor, will we be able to potentially get you back on the podcast in the future?
Oh, I would love that. I really would.
Perfect. And we'll probably have that Shakespeare Society piece under your belt as well, so it'd be great to refer back to that. Well, thank you for coming on. That concludes today's episode of the My Generation podcast. In the future, we have got trains, we have got life-changing moments, and so much more to come. Let me know whether you prefer my solo episodes, whether you prefer the talk shows. Very interesting always to hear from new voices as well, and whether you like the ambience of this room, or I should go back outside down by the river and record more again outdoors, as episode 8 was recorded down by the river. I've recorded so many of these now, I'm like... It's actually quite nice to be confused by them, because it's
I can imagine.
So much content. I don't know what I'll be like when we reach episode 50. So thank you all so much for listening, and thank you, Anna, for coming on to talk about it.
Thank you.
And we'll be hearing from you all again very soon in the next episode next week of the My Generation podcast, and that will be with either Dan, Stephen, or myself. So thank you for listening, and we'll hear from you then.